today I am joined with the legendary Dr. Eric Helms, and we're going to be talking about primarily intuitive eating and dietary self-monitoring. If you could, for us, Eric, give us a brief synopsis of who you are and why we should listen to you.
Sure, man. And first, thanks for having me on. Always fun to discuss stuff that I obsess over. My name's Eric Helms. I'm currently here in New Zealand. I am a research fellow at the Auckland University of Technology in the strength conditioning department. What brought me out here, now doing some science, was originally just my love for lifting weights. So started out as a competitive bodybuilder and powerlifter, and fell in love with it. And my colleagues and I at 3D Muscle Journey, that's fellow natural bodybuilders, Jeff Alberts, Brad Loomis, and Alberto Nunez, started a movement, you could say, of us trying to bring a more evidence-based and arguably sustainable approach to helping athletes in the strength and physique community. And that's kind of morphed into everything that it is today. You know, fast forward 11 years forward, I've got my PhD. I'm the chief science officer for 3D Muscle Journey, and I've done a lot of other offshoots of that, be they research reviews, books, etc. And I still compete, still lift weights, and still do my best to help others. And I do a little more science communication today than I did as PTing or coaching of yesteryears, you could say.
Fantastic. So pretty much interesting story, actually. I don't know if you remember this or not, but we actually had met when you had come to London, and I've got a funny story to tell you about that in a second. But
2013?
2013, yeah. And
I think that's 2013. Maybe 2014 in April, actually.
Yeah. Somewhere in that ballpark. Yeah. I remember it being at the start of my degree, because I think you had started, if I remember correctly, when you started your PhD. It was actually when I was doing my bachelor's, if I remember correctly. So it was an interesting. I was constantly almost thinking about it, like, not in a weird way, thinking about you as I was doing my bachelor's, and thinking that, you know, it kind of gave me a lot of motivation as I was doing it, actually, to be honest. So being dyslexic and, you know, finding academia really, really challenging, I actually found, you know, thinking about, I remember you had got this far, so I'm sure I could do it as well. So it was very inspiring. Also, I back in the day as well, I remember looking at your 3DMJ website and looking at all your qualifications back in the day, and I was like, Jesus, like, you would almost kind of, because I don't know what it was, I always figured, like, I was a bit of a course junkie. I always just love learning, even in positions where I don't really need to necessarily do a course, which I might already know a subject topic on or something like that, but feel the need almost to get the qualification, just for the sake of learning and trying to be the best I can be. But I remember just seeing that, and I was like, geez, like you'd had like almost like this, it looked like almost the credits on Star Wars at the start with all these things. So very, very impressive. So it
was largely due to my like insecurity at the time, because I didn't have my pro card, so I didn't have the physique credibility of my colleagues. And then the other folks who were doing the science thing were Dr. Joe and Lee Norton, and they were PhDs. So I might as well at least have, maybe if I get 30 certifications, I can trade up for like a PhD.
yeah, very good. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that. I remember seeing that inside the Life of a Natural Pro with Lane Norton, and I remember being that when he started talking about a PhD, I was like, I've never even heard about something like that. And you know, that was one of the first people, I think, in the research-based community of bodybuilding I had seen. I was like, wow, God. I've got a quick question about that, actually, because I remember seeing an interview recently. He was saying about I was quite interested in what Lane said about the cycle he did, in terms of he would do 4 weeks building muscle, 2 weeks in a fat loss phase, and like, was that originally your inspiration or your inception of that idea? Was that down to yourself, or?
No, I don't know that Lane still does that, but there used to be this whole, like, because we were all bulking too fast. So we'd end up having to do these really frequent mini cuts. So it'd be like a 4 weeks on, 1 week off, or something like that. Or what I originally proposed, because I saw this as becoming problematic, that people were just going on the seafood diet and then dieting. And I thought it was really inefficient, because they were way past the amount of calories they could actually sequester as lean body mass, and then having to diet off all the fat they gained because they were eating, huge surpluses. Was, let's make a minimum ratio of 4 to 1. So if you get 4 months of gaining, then you've earned yourself a 1 month mini cut. And that normally, just by people not wanting to hate the way they look in the mirror, lowers the amount of surplus they're in the 4 month phase, and then necessarily reduces the amount of deficit that they put on in that 1 month. So it was like this decent rule of thumb that started to fix that problem.
Cool. Yeah. Very interesting. And I remember, I don't know if you felt the same way about Lane Norton. He was so detailed and so evidence-based, and it just seemed like that was such a almost a breath of fresh air in the fitness industry. I remember, I think it was not Simply by Science, Shredded by Science. I'm trying to think of the website. I think you had a few articles on there as well. Simply Shredded, that's what it was. And yep. I do remember seeing Lane's and how detailed that was, and I was like, geez, like it really pushed the envelope really in terms of like where bodybuilding could go, and it wasn't just, eat these 5 foods, which I also want to talk about as well, the 5 foods that work. And but yeah, very advanced, and it definitely inspired me as well to be a more research-based practitioner like yourself as well. So talking about that, I do want to start with what we had spoke about originally about the Beyond the Diet article you had actually sent me, because I thought it was so insightful. You really spoke to a lot of the things I was actually going through at that time. You mentioned about how some people struggle getting lean, and they've had multiple series of trying to get lean, and they can never get lean. And I also as well talking about this kind of the oscillating effect of getting out of just bulking and cutting, and it never even dawned on me. I was just finishing kind of a cut for 3 months, and I probably got to the leanest I've got, and I wasn't by any means like bodybuilding stage shredded or anything like that, but for me it was like, wow, God, I felt so dedicated and disciplined in that time. However, I was thinking in the back of my head, do I now transition into a muscle building phase and just repeat the thing again? And I wondered if there was a kind of a center point between these two extremes where we could maybe do like a maintenance phase, or something where there wasn't necessarily so much of a push to focus on necessarily building muscle or losing fat. So I wondered if you could maybe talk about that article in a bit more depth, and in some insights on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the mindset that we have, that I think we often support in the kind of research-focused community and in the less research-focused community in bodybuilding, is that you push hard, you bulk, you cut. It's a phasic approach. And I don't intend to turn that on its head, but rather point to some of the issues with it. So it is true that if you're not in a calorie surplus, especially at any stage past the relatively early phases of your muscle building, it's going to be a little less efficient to put on muscle mass. However, if you then take it too far, you can get the same inefficiency through a different means. If you're attempting to gain a pound a week, which is something that's trotted out all the time in our community as a reasonable rate of muscle gain, a 500 calorie surplus, the scale should be going up a pound every week. I would say that's probably 4 to 5 times the realistic rate you could actually get in terms of muscle. And even, all that weight simply just cannot be muscle, even if you reduce the surplus. There's always going to be some proportionate amount of body fat. So the inefficiency comes from gaining this ton of body fat, compared to what you would have gained, which might have been slightly less with a smaller surplus, but a lot leaner. And then necessarily having to diet that off in a cyclical phasic manner. So it's now no longer, if you push it too far, optimizing the reality of body composition change through calorie surplus and then calorie deficits. It's forcing yourself to have a calorie deficit to clean up the mess you made of gaining too quickly by dieting. So I think some people get so frustrated with that, they just go fully into I'm just going to recomp. And they hang around maintenance all the time, and then they never really make any progress. So it's easy to spin your wheels in one way, and it's easier to spin your wheels in the other way, where you go through harsh diets, harsh surpluses, gain unnecessary fat, and then diet really hard and potentially lose muscle from that process. So I think it's really important for people to, one, be able to know what their actual goal is, and then two, be able to match the approach to their goal and also have realistic expectations. So those 3 things are really important. What's realistic for you? What are your actual goals? And then does your method align with those? So I think bodybuilders, it makes a ton of sense for us to gain weight and then diet, because getting on stage requires us to diet. And because we have these cyclical phases where we spend at least 3, if not up to 9 months dieting, where we know that our gains are going to be, we're trying to hold on to our gains rather than even making any during that time period. And then there's a recovery phase. So, if you commit to a contest prep, you basically said, hey, I'm going to take a year off of making any muscular gains. There's the recovery phase and there's the dieting phase, where you're inefficiently not gaining muscle, perhaps losing muscle, and at best maintaining, especially in a drug-free community. But honestly, even in the enhanced community, you're going from drugs and off-season to drugs and contest prep, but you have less calories. So even then, it's going to be very difficult. So the point being that bodybuilders must bulk and cut. So we are making the best of what I would say is a bad situation. Additionally, bodybuilders have a very different goal to most people, and that's to look ridiculously good on one day or multiple days in a single season. Most people, though, have the goal of they want to look good, as good as they can, of course, but have it be something that they can sustain and just live their life. And where people get into trouble is they take the bulk cut approach of bodybuilders, and they also then look to bodybuilders as kind of the standard or something similar to what looks good, instead of something much more reasonable or sustainable, forgetting that bodybuilders are incredibly hungry, in a terrible place for building muscle, maintaining muscle, or even maintaining a social life at the end of a contest prep, and then trying to sustain that long term. So I would say for me, being somewhere between 20 to 25 pounds over my stage weight is what's sustainable in the off season. I still look good. I'm very comfortable. I can gain muscle mass, and I'm not food focused. But I think a lot of people think the difference is, bodybuilders are 5%. I need to be 8 to 10%. And that's, if you do the math, that puts you in actually a stage condition that a lot of bodybuilders don't get to until their second or third season. So it's completely unsustainable. And then it forces this kind of, circle through a square peg kind of a square hole scenario. In reality, most people, the way it should go is that in their novice years or early stages, maybe the first 4 or 5 years, unless they started with being very high in body fat, they probably shouldn't be cutting at all. They should just be in a moderate surplus, eating mostly to hunger, but sufficient to actually get stronger and see scale weight move. And then at some point they look up and they go, I'm really starting to slow down my rate of muscle gain. I'm not quite as hungry anymore. My surplus is slowing down. I can push that a little bit, but I'm now seeing that I'm accumulating more body fat than I am muscle mass. My body composition is changing so that while I have more muscle mass, my body fat percentage is going up. And at that point, that's probably when you want to abandon the more aggressive approach to bulking. And you need to find something that looks a little more like maintenance, but that encourages gaining. I think this has been called a lot of things. Recomping. I think gaintaining is a term I really like, because it does keep the term gaining in there. There should be some upward creep of your body weight. You should be eating a little more than you would normally, and emphasizing, I would say, muscle building supportive nutrition habits to try to encourage the environment where muscle growth can happen. But you're rate limited now as no longer being a novice to how much muscle you can gain. And your goal is probably not worth the trade-off of having to go through these cyclical cutting processes. And it may even be less efficient in the long run if you have to do that too frequently. So that's kind of the crux of that article, is that people need to relearn how to do maintenance. And the rate of weight gains that I recommend for non-novices are like 0.5 to 1% of your body weight gained per month, So now that kind of turns that old adage of a pound per week on its head. Now, if you've got a 200-pound male, that might be 1 pound per month. So it's 1/4, to 1/2, or even less, or somewhere between there in terms of the rate of weight gain, which looks a lot more like kind of just living life than it does. It's time to get on the bulk train.
Cool. Thank you for that. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I remember seeing that 1 pound a week as like the gold standard back in the day. And do you feel as well, when people are getting ready or for like either a bodybuilding competition or in general, do you feel as though in order for them to have a successful cut, assuming that obviously they have like maybe a good coach who's very evidence-based and is patient and compassionate, Do you feel as though they have to have an effective off-season to have an actually effective cutting phase, air quote, or contest preparation? Do you feel as though that people who are always cutting don't really seem to get that lean, and they would actually do better if they had air quote an off-season, and then
yeah, absolutely, and there's it's bidirectional. So if you have a really harsh cut as a bodybuilder, and for almost not regardless of how lean you get, but you get reasonably lean, but you crush yourself in the process, your next off season is not going to be very good either, because you're going to rebound massively for behavioral and physiological reasons, which are pretty much intertwined. And then you're going to find yourself sometime 3 months post show heavier than when you actually started your contest prep, and dieting now, paradoxically, sometime 3 months into your off season. So it goes that way too. But what you're saying is also a big part of it. Someone who has spent their whole life on and off dieting will often find that their body's kind of in a state of relative energy deficiency most of the time, which is them, basically being careful, quote unquote. I don't want to gain too much body fat. I'm trying to make lean gains. I do cardio in the off season. I really try to stay away from eating out. I weigh and track my food in the off season. I freak out if I see my scale weight went up, et cetera, or I cyclically cut. So they're going to have a lot of adaptations towards conservation, essentially, is the way to look at it from an energy expenditure perspective. And they're already experiencing low-level diet fatigue and all of the physiological symptoms associated with, the subclinical, relative energy deficiency syndrome in sport. Relative energy deficiency in sport. The syndrome that's associated with athletes who are not eating sufficient to fuel their needs. So when you maintain a leaner physique than is realistic for your physiology, something has to pay off that debt, if you will. So if you think of your body as a brick and mortar business, and it's 3 stories, it's got to keep the lights on, it's got to pay its staff, it's got an accounting firm, it's got AC. When you say, hey, I'm not going to give you guys as much income, we're having less coming in, we'll call that food, that means we have to reduce our expenses, right? And this is basically energy, if we're going to hold true with this analogy. So if income gets reduced, okay, that means we need to let go of, we have 3 on the accountant team. I wonder if we can get by with 2. And you know what? Let's only turn on the AC and the heater when it's really at these certain thresholds for being cold or hot. Let's get motion sensor lights so they turn off when no one's moving. And then you start to experience negative symptoms, like everyone has been still for a while, typing at the computers and the lights go off, right? And that's the equivalent of, stress being experienced by the employees. That's like you waking up at 4 a.m. in the middle of your diet because you don't have sufficient energy availability, or noticing that your libido has dropped, or a woman experiencing dysregulation for menstrual cycle, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if someone is already in that state, which comes from not having sufficient energy, and then they go right time to get leaner, they're basically starting 10 feet back of the starting blocks for everyone else who's starting the race at a healthy place. Because as soon as you start dieting, you start circling the drain. You're producing short-term lack of energy availability. Then as you get leaner and leaner and leaner and leaner and leaner, knowing that adipose tissue produces hormones, it's not just inner tissue, it produces leptin, among other things. Eventually you're going to be in a state of, I would say, long-term low energy availability when your body stores are pretty much just down to glycogen and lean muscle mass. So you're going to have to get there eventually to where the point where very few people are allowed to work. Most are furloughed. The lights are off at night and only have one person on the accounting team. But if you're already starting, 10, 20% of the way there, it's going to get bad quick, and you're going to have to make a lot of adjustments, do more cardio, eat less, and you're going to have more cravings and a bigger rebound, and you might lose more muscle in the process. And the stress levels are going to be a whole lot higher throughout. So absolutely.
Yeah. Interesting. I do feel as though, I remember watching an interview with Lamb McDonald recently, and he was saying something to the effect of, it's really interesting that us guys, we want to get rich and shredded and as big as possible, but usually when we actually get lean, our libido's gone, and then the girls aren't interested anyway. And it definitely just resonates with what you were saying. Nice little transition from that. I remember when we had seen your presentation in London, that you were the first ever time I have ever heard about diet breaks. And I thought that was just such a clever idea that I'd never even occurred, because I'd heard about refeeding and stuff like that, where you do like the 24-hour carbohydrate increase up to your approximated maintenance and stuff like this. And but that was, to me, that made so much sense, because I always felt as though when I had done a refeed previous, I mean, I say refeed previously, I wouldn't necessarily, it would be more of a free-for-all binge sometimes, and then other times it would be quite moderate. But when I had done a classic refeed, I always felt as though I wasn't as full, and I still looked very depleted, and then I would just carry on into the dieting phase again. And when you had said that, that made so much sense, and I felt as though when I've applied that now, my mood's been so much better, my sex drive's been a lot better, my concentration's a lot better, and also I look fuller. And I also find it's almost counterintuitive that you would never think, in a dieting phase, eat more to lose weight, or in a very structured, calculated way. Could you possibly just give us a breakdown on diet breaks and why they are so beneficial?
Yeah, it's the same reason why dieting beats you up, is that diet breaks unbeat you up a little bit. So for all the things that I described, there's a time course and also a energy imbalance aspect to that. So if you put yourself in a huge deficit right now, that drain circling will happen faster. We have good data to show that. Rates of weight loss will increase, but rates of all the other bad stuff will increase as well, right? The compensatory factors will be higher. So obviously we would think, well, okay, then if I eat a lot, it should reverse that. But there is a limit to how much eating will do, especially in a short time period. A very large increase in energy over a short time period doesn't necessarily increase energy expenditure disproportionately by any means. It does increase glycogen. You will feel subjectively fuller for that day, maybe, depending on how hard you've dieted. But some of the impacts on the hormonal cascades that tell your body more about energy availability in a longer term sense take a longer term. So, for example, there's data showing that having a single day at a very high calorie intake doesn't reverse the course of luteinizing hormone pulsatility being disrupted in women, which is an indicator that they might be on the path towards amenorrhea, or the loss of menstrual cycle. But there is similar data that has a similar total deficit beforehand, and then following that, 2 days of maintenance did seem to return LH pulsatility back to normal. That's comparing across studies, so it's imperfect. But very simply, we also see in the case studies and some of the observational trials of cohorts of physique competitors, they start eating a whole lot immediately. But they don't start to see the return of their hormones back to baseline until the 3 to 4 month mark, many times on average. So there is a necessary time course, and it makes sense from an evolutionary perspective that if your tribe, quote unquote, or an individual even who's trying to survive a famine gets access to food temporarily, it stumbles upon an animal that they can hunt and eat, or they find a grove of some berries. But if that gets depleted really quickly, and so let's say after a day of eating by the tribe, you wouldn't want all of your energy expenditure to be mounted back up. You wouldn't want someone to then be, I'm full, I don't need to eat. You wouldn't want menstrual cycles to come back and men to be virile, and all of a sudden you're able to get someone pregnant in the face of a famine, and then you can't produce breast milk, or you can, but it costs a ton of energy, and then the mother dies. So all of these things would be counterproductive. We would probably only see the people survive who had some kind of adaptation or physiological process where there was energy coming in for a sufficient time period did we go, okay, right, it's safe to now, hire Tammy back on the accounting team to turn the AC on anytime it's a little hot, to have everything running at full 100% capacity. That's only safe when we know that we have the available energy to sustain that. So I think the difference between a single meal or a single day or multiple days or a week or 2 weeks is really comes down to how much time is spent in that sufficient surplus. But it's really important to note that eating at maintenance can only do so much. It can only take you so far. If you look at the reversal of metabolic adaptation, or I should say energy expenditure adaptation, if you look at all the trials on it, when someone actually gets back to a totally non-down-regulated energy expenditure, it's always associated with regaining lost weight. So that's part of the reason why people who expect to just walk around shredded are almost always dealing with some kind of issue. And now, quote unquote, walking around shredded, it's probably better to say people who are trying to walk around below their settling point, whatever their individual combination of behavior, psychology, and physiology results in, what can they realistically maintain without experiencing negative symptoms of trying to do so. So that for some people that looks pretty damn lean, and for other people it might be a little higher in body fat than they'd like. But that's heavily influenced by a lot of factors. Obviously, we aren't seeing rising settling points in the West. We're seeing the obesogenic environment, food availability, low food cost, high energy density, and hyperpalatability, and a low energy expenditure overwhelming our ability to defend the upper end of that settling point. So we're seeing waistlines rise. So the point being is that diet breaks and refeeds are great, but it's kind of like hitting pause and giving a very small boost relative to actually being in a sustained surplus over time. So I don't want anyone to get the idea that a diet break or a refeed can eliminate the problems associated with the deficit. It's more so that maybe using them could increase adherence, acceptability of the diet, reduce rebounding, and might help with maintenance of lean muscle mass based on some recent data that came out of Dr. Campbell's lab.
I love that. I love the idea that you said it's not necessarily this magical cure-all. It is essentially like a pause in the diet to maybe increase adherence and prevent the rebound, which I would imagine if you are pushing the really, really lean degrees of low body fat, the susceptibility to wanting to put on loads of fat very quickly is probably a lot higher than someone who's clinically obese or something of that nature. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense. You did touch on something I was quite interested in, which is this idea of the set point or settling point theory. And in terms of it, for some people, do you think some people in some way cannot get, air quote, a six-pack because obviously there are lifestyle factors to this, but have you ever met people where you've literally just had to pull the plug on it, where the lifestyle factors, the psychology, and their previous diet and history, it was just not going to happen in terms of getting a six-pack or getting very, very lean, and you basically had to say, we can't do this anymore, you're going to have to maybe focus on reversing or going into a maintenance phase or gaining?
I mean, there's tons of people who are just not in the right environment, state of mind, relationship with food or their body, who, with no physiological reason or physics reason in terms of thermodynamics, calorie deficit, aren't going to get lean right now. But I don't think that is, that's common, don't get me wrong, but I don't think that's a symptom. That's not like something that, what's up with that? I think that the bigger problem is that people can get lean if they do deal with all those things, or more often just willpower their way through all those things or drug through those things. But they find some temporary, often unhealthy to some degree solution to be able to get a six-pack. And that is, of course, because of how they got there and the mindset they were in and the unhealthy and probably negative motivations to get there. It's just a clock ticking before they regain the weight. And it gets worse the next time, and again, and again, and again. So what I see more often than that, because of the population I'm working with recreational and competitive physique athletes and strength athletes, is that they have tried to get to whatever leanness they believe is sustainable based on some article they read or something, or just what they want to see in the mirror, despite how they feel. and they have tried to do it maybe 10 times. And they're just trying, well, this time I want to try keto, or this time I want to try it with diet breaks, or this time I want to try it with refeeds, or I just need the magic science, or the magic bullet, or the magic drug, or whatever that'll allow me to hold on to the amount of leanness that I think I'm supposed to have, that'll make me happy. And then, even the people who do succeed, it doesn't actually make them happy because, I hate to say it, but if like your perception of life is that it's all going to be better if I just have a six-pack, you probably need to diversify your, perspective on life as to what it's about and what makes you happy and what value can be there. And that's not even necessarily healthy or better for performance either. It probably would be worse, if you have to work so hard to get there. So I think more often than not, the problem is just that people don't have their values in the right place. They're focused on, movement as a tool to look a certain way, so they don't enjoy the process. They want to look a certain way because they think they are undesirable to the opposite sex, or they're not part of the community they want to be part of. They don't look like they're heroes. They're not, they want to be a personal trainer, but they have to look shredded to do that. And all these, false, relatively harmful assumptions they have that don't actually align with their values. They align with their fears. So they're running off of a very caustic, damaging fuel to their fuel tank, if you will. So it's not exactly something that you can want to solve. It's the inherent problem is their perspective.
100%. I love what you said about a lot of people think, well, if I just do this exercise, that will equal then a better body. And they're thinking on it on such a kind of overly simplistic way that they don't enjoy the process. It's like, well, if I just do this and this, then I'll get in shape. And I remember having one of my personal training clients once say to me, and it's a very kind of nuanced thing, but she said, I see people eating their dieting foods and then I just eat my salmon and salad and get on with my life. And she was trying to say that I've integrated that as part of my everyday life. This is my dieting food and this is my regular food. It's just she eats healthy on a normal, regular basis, and it isn't this humongous pendulum shift or a paradigm shift to do one or the other. So yeah, definitely relate to that. Also as well, so in terms of the settling point, I've noticed personally, if I'm very honest, I think I have only ever had a six-pack once in my life. And I seem to cruise around a lot of a higher, I would say a healthy body fat percentage. But I've noticed for me to get very, very lean, my body does fight it a whole lot. So in terms of if I was to recalibrate and maybe kind of reset my settling point, would there be a typical approach to that, or does that just really depend on my goal or anyone else in that same category? Say if it was just for recreational use. Would there be a certain approach of getting there? What you would recommend?
It would all come down to behavior and lifestyle. So the physiology aspect. The reason why we don't use the term set point is just because we're not animals. When the set point theory came from more mechanistic and animal-based research. If you look at animals who are not burdened by Instagram or a Western society or whatever, they have a certain level of body weight and body fatness that is ideal for their individual physiology, and that's to hang out, given even access to food and being able to live in a quote-unquote natural lifestyle. So the reason why humans have a settling point is because we live in a human society. It's not something that we necessarily reset. You just have to change your environment to get yourself closer to your set point. Now, you can do that in such an unhealthy way that you can be below your set point. People, one of the most deadly eating disorders is anorexia. People who are so effective, tragically effective at modifying the environment that they're so far below their set point that they can overwhelm all their signals that they die in a surprisingly high number of cases. So I think modulating your environment so that this is where we could tie it into intuitive eating. A big part of intuitive eating is that you're going off of internal rather than external cues. So someone with obesity and someone with anorexia, neither one is going off of internal cues. The external cues are quite different. And one is taking a lot more agency than the other to use these external cues, but they are still external. And what I mean by that what I mean by agency and not agency is the internal cues are your normal hunger and satiety that would be in response to eating probably what our species has eaten for most of its existence. Single item ingredient foods, foods that are minimally processed. I'm talking even post agricultural, but pre-hyper palatable, highly engineered foods that are high energy density and high in calories. And eventually I'll talk about how they don't need to be completely eliminated or vilified, but more so just that if you're eating foods that tend to respond in ways that our bodies are used to over time, over a lot of species time, you'll probably be close to your set point. So someone with anorexia is battling all that and probably tracking their food, tracking their weight, looking at their body in the mirror. And depending on how bad, I mean, they could be completely starving themselves, or they could just be someone who's trying to stay really, really lean all the time. It could have comorbidities like vomiting or doing compensatory exercise. So it could have bulimic aspects to it, right? That's further to do that. There's all these things that they can do using external cues, something outside of their internal hunger and satiety. So they're ignoring that, suppressing them, but they're going by food scale, body checking, visual looks in the mirror, or some other external assessment to decide, here's what I need to do with my energy intake, and therefore I'm going below my set point. And I've modified my settling point, because by definition I'm settling below my set point, right? On the other end of the extreme, we have someone with obesity, and I said who's not taking agency necessarily, and I don't mean that as a good thing. I'm not suggesting they should take agency and be anorexic. I'm suggesting just that it's a different etiology. So someone with obesity, they are probably eating for emotional reasons. They might be eating for sensory cues. They might be eating for convenience because a job or family or stress requires that or makes them feel as though they don't have the time to cook, the financial means to purchase a healthy diet. Or they may have been raised in a family where the norm was eating these hyperpalatable foods. So we know that highly processed foods lead to larger passive overconsumption. They are consumed more quickly. They don't suppress hunger hormones as much, even when you're in a surplus. And they don't produce as much caloric expenditure because they're so processed. It's easier to access the metabolizable energy. So if you're just living in a Western society and you think of it this way, when you walk by Subway in the morning and they just made their cookies, you didn't want cookies. It's 8 a.m. I don't really wake up at 8 a.m. wanting a frickin' cookie, And if you're listening to this podcast and you're like, I wake up at 8 a.m. and I want a cookie, you're probably dieting, or you're probably dieting too often, So if you walk by Subway, you want a cookie, you didn't prior, that's an external cue. If you act on that, that's totally normal, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. If you are someone who's well regulated in your intuitively eating, as we'll get to the definition eventually, that would probably just lead to less consumption of calories later in the day. It wouldn't be a big deal. But if someone is combining that with a very low energy expenditure, they're sedentary, and we know that total activity levels to some degree regulate appetite. So if you're really, really physically inactive, that dysregulates appetite. If you're exposed to hyperpalatable foods, a lot of sensory cues, and cheap foods that you grew up eating, all of those things combined are all external cues, but lead to someone being with obesity. So they would consume enough and be far above their settling point. And it would appear as though their settling point was, 40% body fat, while it would appear for the person with anorexia that their body fat was, 6% was their settling point. But in both cases, neither one has an auto-regulated kind of approach to their eating. It's not true intuitive eating. Now, intuitive eating, TM, is a specific kind of clinical tool and lifestyle approach to eating that has to do with using internal cues. There's a lot else that goes into it. Taking foods off of the pedestal of being either good or bad. So sure, you can eat those cookies when you walk by Subway, but you're also going to honor your hunger signals. That's a big part of it. And you're going to honor your needs, and you're going to do what truly nourishes you. So is eating 12 cookies because you've got that sensory cue meeting the guidelines of intuitive eating? Probably not. But you might want a cookie because it smells good, it feels good, it's going to make your day better, and you liked it. And that, if you're listening to your hunger signals later in the day, when some of those hyperpalatable sensations goes down, and there's that delayed effect, but those satiety signals do come in later, and if you're physically active, you might find that you just eat a couple hundred calories less at lunch or dinner, and it doesn't matter. And in fact, it's better than restraining yourself from maybe eating that cookie. Maybe not. It depends on your goals, where you're at, what you want to do, etc., and what are the drivers you have. So the point being is that if someone wants to be closer to their set point, if someone wants to be below their set point, I just think that's an unhealthy goal. I wouldn't recommend that, And if they've tried to get there multiple times, either they have an unhealthy relationship with food or their body that's independent from them being above or below their set point, like someone with obesity in most cases, not all, or they are trying to be below their set point, and which is just physiologically unhealthy, and it's just going to result in this constant kind of banging your head against the wall and trying to find a way forward. So I think some people are I mean, obviously it's going to be a different approach for each individual person, but essentially that's kind of where internal external cues, settling points, and intuitive eating all kind of intersect. If you can understand that relationship and those causes, then you can kind of see maybe what path makes sense for the individual person.
Cool. Fantastic. Interesting. Yeah, I remember you mentioned about anorexia, and I wanted to talk maybe about orthorexia nervosa as well. I remember one of the kind of criteria for orthorexia nervosa, the unhealthy obsession with eating foods that you consider healthy, was a lack of an inability to eat in an intuitive manner. And it's quite interesting now that we're so focused on macros. And don't get me wrong, I want to talk about, obviously, if it fits your macros, maybe in a little bit. But it's interesting how we have come to that point, even fit your macros is almost, like you mentioned, about an external cue that we're so hell-bent on that we ignore all our satiety and hunger signals and concentration, how we feel and stuff like this. And I remember recently when I was doing my cut and just coming out of it a little bit and going into somewhat of what I would consider a maintenance phase and bringing my calories a bit higher, that there were some days where I didn't feel hungry, but I felt it was necessary to eat to the numbers. And this is just nonsense. Whereas I could have potentially, most likely, eaten less that day and probably had more the next day, and it probably would have kind of had the steer of some balance effect of had the same, as opposed to eating that same static, rigid guidelines and rigid numbers each day, it probably would have had the same effect. But in terms of that, I remember actually kind of dabbling with intuitive eating once when I'd come back from university. I think it was the second year. And I just literally went off my hunger signals, and I probably created a higher deficit without even realizing it, without being like, oh my god, I'm at 2,000 calories, oh my god, I need to eat more, in the fear of I was going to lose tons of muscle, and it didn't even faze me. I just made sure I had enough protein each meal, I had enough carbs that I had enough energy, and if I felt as though I looked too bloated or anything like that, I would just kind of maybe back on my food the next day, I would have a lighter meal in the evening, and just went kind of going about that. And I found I looked so well, and I was just training outside at the time. I didn't actually pay for a gym, and even then I still looked, what I would consider something what I would really enjoy looking like, and I didn't track macros and weigh food and stuff like this, and even now where I've come away from the kind of scaffolding in the training wheels of if it fits your macros, I find as though now, because you have that kind of what I call like your dietary intelligence is so high from your fat loss phase or tracking, you have that intuition to actually look at foods and know what's in what and how to portion things, because I think you said on multiple of the videos as well that you've gained so many good habits from your tracking that you don't need to be so hell-bent on tracking every meticulous thing. You probably have an already good understanding of your body, your hunger, and you're probably not going to blow it quite as easy. So talking about that, yeah, so if we talk about maybe if it fits your macros as well, because I remember when I first heard about this, it was actually through Ian McCarthy back in the day, and I remember this massive controversy on the internet, and I remember looking at YouTube, and I know the Hodge twins were like super famous. They would come out with like 8-7 videos a day and stuff like this on YouTube, and I remember looking at that and seeing Ian McCarthy and saying about all this fit your macros, and I was just like, what on earth is this? And you know, obviously the backlash was obviously, unfortunately for Ian McCarthy, was people say you're not in shape, you never won a bodybuilding show, and all this like pandemonium kicked off on the internet, and then, but later on, I noticed. I think it was actually that's where I first saw you, Eric. Was it that he promoted you guys and was showing Alberto Nunez, and I was like, oh my god, this guy's like an alien, and it had that crazy level of leanness. And then later on, I think it was like Nick Rat on YouTube and a few other YouTubers, and obviously Matt Ogris at the time had come on the scene, and the level of conditioning was just insane. And that's when I transitioned from this clean eating approach into Fit Your Macros. It was kind of one of the next chapters. So I wondered if you could just give us a brief outline if it fit your macros, and if you could, a lot of my clients are always kind of skeptical if it fits your macros. I'm saying you can actually have this and it still be conducive to actually achieving your goals. So could you maybe explain, you know, there's no specific like magical food we need to eat or magical foods to get in shape, if you could?
Yeah, I think it's useful to get away from the terminology of Fit Your Macros. People didn't have as much of a problem with it when they simply just talk about tracking, you know.
Yeah.
When If It Fits Your Macros is presented as a diet or an approach, that's when it becomes problematic, you know. Specifically, there's a big difference between trying to hit target numbers and tracking to see what you're eating. You know, you were talking about how you were not hungry, but you ate more because you had targets. However, if you just tracked and noticed on that day that you ate less, that might tell you, oh, I wasn't eating as much that day. I wasn't as hungry. I wonder why. Then you might have noticed I didn't move as much, you know, because in most people, we couple our energy intake with our energy expenditure, unless we're sedentary. That's one very specific example. But another thing that happens with Fit Your Macros that I would say is probably a positive, the conversation that you were alluding to, is why are certain foods more useful for fat loss? And the quote-unquote clean eating foods, or I would say unprocessed foods that are higher in fiber, higher water content, lower energy density, higher in micronutrients, and that make up what we constitute healthy eating. The reason why those are used is because they result in a lower intake. They're more likely to result in a habitual level of calorie intake that will put you in a deficit if you're above your settling point, maintenance if you're at your settling point, and a surplus if you're under it. So when someone is exposed to the idea of if it fits your macros and they have this shock that, hold on, I can't, Snickers aren't just inherently bad, that's useful. Because now they understand there's nothing inherently problematic about processed foods or quote-unquote bad foods or foods that are on the list. It's just that they may not be satiating. They may not provide consistent energy. And if they make up the bulk of your diet, they will result in more energy consumption. But I think a lot of people who promote Fit Your Macros don't even realize that. They just look at the energy balance equation. They just think, you can eat in a deficit from eating whatever you want. You can eat in a surplus from eating whatever you want. And then these people really struggle and develop more weird relationships with food, spending 30 minutes trying to cook something that is tasty while trying to fit a shoestring macro budget. I think where tracking is really helpful is in that it can tell you things. But the only time you really should be needing to track is when you're first learning, you know, what are the macronutrient and calorie breakdowns of foods? You know, what are fat dominant foods? What are carb dominant foods? What are protein dominant foods? You don't want to be the person who's like, oh, nuts, that's high in protein, you know? So from an educational perspective, tracking is very useful initially with clients. And then you can get to the point where you understand, oh, which foods have which numbers and what do I eat on a regular basis? And certainly you can use targets and track to hit them. And that can be a very useful tool anytime you're trying to push past your settling point. If you're trying to get really, really lean, or if you're trying to gain a lot of weight or gain muscle mass, and the barrier is that you would habitually just eat less. You know, and that's true for a lot of people. Having targets holds you accountable to enforcing a surplus on a regular basis. But I would say that for 99% of people, that probably is like your diet should, if there's a way to induce calorie deficit without inducing a calorie deficit by tracking. And most of the time, just cleaning someone's diet up and getting them physically active will result in weight loss. And it may need to be that it's concurrent, that while they're learning about a healthy lifestyle, while they're learning about foods that are more satiating, they also are purposely dieting because they've had 20, 30, 40 years of eating in a way that is conducive to weight gain and a physical and a lack of physical activity. And they're discovering how to move. They're learning to love a physically active lifestyle. They're retooling their sensory organs in their mouth and their body and their hormonal and metabolic response to meals to get used to and actually maybe enjoy and learning to cook and all these other practical skills of eating healthier. So it may be that if you can't just say, hey, let's eat healthy and let's be more active, and they would lose weight because it's very, very difficult for them to adhere to. But given now we create these hard lines in their brain and we say, hey, we're going to put you on a calorie deficit. Here are your numbers. It's gamified. Is that sustainable? No. And last time they did that, they gained weight. And the time before that, they gained weight afterwards as well. And the time before that. And that's why they've come to you as a personal trainer. So it's critical for you not to just hold their hand while they do what they already did, lose weight and then regain it again, but to teach them how do you sustain this? And that is the whole aspect of, yes, while we've got you on a weight loss approach and you might have targets, you might have a calorie expenditure goal for cardio, but I'm going to help you learn to have physical activity as a lifestyle. I'm going to help you to incorporate a lot more of these healthy foods as a lifestyle. So I think if it fits your macros is not that useful in most scenarios. It's a good thing to understand, and it's good to learn how to track. It's good to know which foods have which calories. But if the only thing keeping you accountable to your goals is a certain set of numbers, that's kind of like putting your finger in a dam and the water spitting out. Like, your finger is probably not the best tool to fix that. And it's a temporary solution. So I think it's really useful initially to learn how to track. Tracking is very useful anytime you need to push outside of what your body actually wants to do. But as long as the barrier to your goal is not physiology, if it's behavior, psychology, societal, external cues like I was talking about, then tracking is probably not the appropriate thing, because we know, just like having a really strict meal plan, having really strict numbers and bringing a scale with you everywhere is a rigid, unhealthy approach to eating. And it doesn't actually change your behavior. It is it's a temporary solution.
100%, yeah. I do think, what you had said about it is almost like a temporary solution. I find that for me, when I've done that style of approach, because I still even to this day the same kind of broy foods, because if I was, like you mentioned before, just to eat very highly processed foods, I would be hungry all the time, not having enough fiber, not having enough macronutrients, not enough protein, and the whole diet goes out the window. I do find that the kind of what I would prefer to call as flexible dieting, more so than if it fits your macros, to try and get away from just focusing on numbers. If I have that flexible restraint, and especially in the dieting phase, where to some degree you have to shoulder a little bit of your hunger to potentially promote small degrees of fat loss from week to week, I find if I have that restraint, I'm like, okay, right, just to kind of keep the day in proportion, I know where my limit is. It creates a little bit of a boundary, I find. Would you agree with that, Eric, in terms of, rather than saying, obviously maybe not focusing on intuitive eating so much so in an extreme fat loss phase? I know you mentioned that you've had a mini cut or something to that effect doing intuitive eating.
So no, I think we need to be clear. Intuitive eating is a specific clinical approach that has a specific definition, and it's weight neutral. So anyone who's losing fat purposely is not intuitive eating by definition.
Right.
If we want to talk about using internal cues to guide what your intake, that's very different, because you can use internal cues like, I'm hungry and I'm not going to eat, but I'm not tracking. So that's in using internal cues, but it's absolutely not intuitive eating, because intuitive eating would be honoring your hunger signals, right? So if I'm 7% body fat, 5 weeks out from the stage, I'm not tracking, but I have habits that result in a high protein intake, a good fruit and vegetable proportion, and I'm eating to be a bit hungry because I know that produces a deficit. That's an internally cued guided cut, but that's very different than intuitive eating. You don't intuitively eat to change body composition. I think that's important to know. Anyone who wants to use the terminology, intuitive eating is a specific definition. If you want to use internal cues, you want to call it auto-regulated eating. You want to call it just, habit-based tracking, something like that. But I think those are all quite valid ways of using it. But intuitive eating, just so you don't run into confusion when you speak to people who are in that world or who use that as a clinical tool, whether they're a dietitian or eating psychologist, etc. It's important to understand that is a specific criteria. There's books written on it. Evelyn Tripoli is the one who originally created intuitive eating, and it's most often used to help people repair their relationship with food and their body image. So just to clarify, but yeah, I mean, tracking having limits and targets is really useful anytime you need limits and targets to reach your goal. But if your goal is constrained not by physiology, your goal is constrained by psychology and behavior, and you're using numbers, that's a stopgap, which is fine, because it might take you years before you retrain your lifestyle, behavior, and all that stuff. But if the only thing you're doing is going, right, I'm 100 pounds overweight, what's 100 times 3,500? Okay, that's how much fat I need to lose. I need to produce that deficit. Okay, 3 years from now, only thing I'm going to do is eat whatever the hell I want to hit these numbers and then do X amount of cardio. You will lose that weight, and then what do? And for most people, it is either, when does my willpower run out, or I didn't have a plan after that, and I just start slowly gaining that weight back, and I'm depressed and in a worse situation later. So, I mean, that's just it's kind of just the way it is. It's only a temporary solution. It's not a problem. Like, if your goal is temporary, like if you're doing a cut, then and you're trying to get lean, and then you don't care if you regain the weight, then absolutely go for it. And that's the whole reason why bodybuilding is not appropriate for most people as a model for how to do it. It's the most effective way to lose weight over 24 weeks or what have you, and keep as much muscle mass as possible. But most people, when you really ask them, are not happy just to take a couple selfies once they get there and then put 20 pounds back on in 4 weeks. They're actually trying to get to a sustainable body fat that they can keep long term. They need to recalibrate the expectations to what actually is sustainable. They might have been sold false hopes from magazine covers or Instagram or what have you. But I think if you can fix the expectation to, you coined it earlier as a healthy body fat. I don't think there's necessarily such thing as a healthy body fat. There's being healthy, and then whatever body fat happens to go along with that, and then what are you happy with, and then what's realistic. And the disconnect is often that what you're happy with is more influenced by the way you perceive yourself as you're supposed to look, rather than, if you hadn't been taught that, oh, that's ugly, that's bad, you wouldn't feel bad about it. If you never had Instagram, you'd be fine at 20% body fat as a male, or 30% body fat as a female. So I think that's the kind of perspective we need to have. We should be seeking performance enhancement, physical health, mental health, wellness, if you will. And then if you have sporting goals, if you have aesthetic goals, which basically means like bodybuilding goals, whether you get on stage or not, you have to realize that is a detour from those other things I just said about wellness. Now, if your goal is, I want to get as lean as I can sustain without it negatively affecting my health, wellness, life, or anything else, fantastic, because that's by definition, it won't be below your set point. But that means basically creating an environment, creating a lifestyle that will result in an appropriate calorie intake for you most of the time. Now I've done that in my life. So for example, I eat a primarily whole food diet. I get, I go on multiple walks per day. I exercise 5 times a week. I do things to promote mental wellness, physical wellness, try to get enough sleep, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I hang out at probably what is my set point. And then sometimes I will purposely push beyond that because I don't find that's I assume that's probably not the best way for me to put on muscle mass and improve season to season as a bodybuilder, or to put on strength and improve competition as a strength athlete. And then I will, cut to make certain weight classes, and I will, cut to get on stage. But as soon as I've decided that I want to compete, and I want to compete in these weight classes they're not the Eric Helms weight classes, they're the IPF and IWF weight classes. They are the strongman weight classes. And as soon as I decide I want to get to a body fat percentage that will get me the highest performance on stage, rather than the one that is associated with me feeling healthy and good, or at least not bad, then I have to choose short-term solutions. I have to track macros, or keep myself slightly hungry even if I'm not tracking macros in a deficit, or keep myself slightly full if I'm not tracking macros in a surplus, or track macros to get in a surplus. So two very different conversations. Intuitive eating is something that you do to relearn essentially how to eat in a more quote-unquote natural way, while auto-regulating intake, using hunger cues, tracking, if it fits your macros, any type of strategy that's used to push body fat down, or to put on muscle mass, is by definition separate than intuitive eating, and probably something that requires effort and external cues to some degree, or at least moderating things based on internal cues to push those goals forward, if that makes sense.
Interesting. I actually never knew that, and that is so interesting. That it is almost just the relationship with food, intuitive eating, trying to get in touch with your hunger signals and not have to necessarily push the degrees of extreme body composition and stuff like that. So thank you for clearing that up, Eric, as well. So
it's understandable. I mean, intuition means something and eating means something. I know even I was talking to Dr. Gabrielle Fendero, and she was even saying that Evelyn Tribole wishes it was a different set of words, because while that is a defined thing, when someone hears it, it means something else to them. Like, oh, okay, I'm not tracking, I'm eating by intuition. But it has problems if you have been exposed to people talking about eating intuitively versus intuitive eating, TM, So, and like the whole concept of people saying, oh, you can only do intuitive eating if you tracked before, that's the polar opposite to what intuitive eating is about. It's teaching people to not use tracking, who are normally coming from a background of being with obesity. They never tracked, So yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Thank you. Interesting thing, I remember, I think one of our first ever conversations back in the day, this is many moons ago, and I would not ever expect you to remember this, but I remember we had a conversation about body types and stuff like this, and I had said, this must have been 2012, I'd literally just finished my personal training certification, I was just so eager to get started, so passionate about it. And I remember I said, I have this lady who's like an endomorph, and this lady who's like an ectomorph, and you very, very calmly and very politely just said, I think you need to rethink this, and I don't think this is going to go that well. but I've always appreciated you just saying, because you could very easily kind of shut someone down and say, listen, bro, and completely just annihilate them with knowledge. But you've always have a very, which I might get onto next actually, this very patient and very compassionate approach to your teaching. I do have a particularly interesting, the actual coaching styles as well of 3DMJ. You all seem of that similar nature, very compassionate, very patient, very knowledgeable. Do you find people who have this very extreme authoritarian kind of style of coaching not to do very well, or do you think some people generally need that?
So I guess it depends on what do you mean by do well.
Okay, so say if we take the average...
if they make a lot of money, you can set up ways to be perceived as doing well and to make money off of an authoritarian position. That's the whole guru model, right?
Yeah.
I'm unassailable. I only do things in one way, and I'm God. So if something bad happens, we already know it's not me. It's got to be you. So you didn't follow it. And then you're attracting people who put you on a pedestal. They're self-selecting for people who consider you God, so they even buy into that. I couldn't follow it. I don't have the dedication, And then you're also going to experience selection bias. So the only people who are going to do well with your system as a guru are people who have the expectancy effect and buy into it, and also go through with it. So they might be either physiologically or psychologically well suited to whatever your system is. You don't adapt for people because it's, like you said, authoritarian, top down, not compassionate, not individualized. And you can charge a lot too, because you're one of the few people, like, especially if you compare them to someone like 3DMJ or Eric Helms, they say stuff like "it depends." They admit when they're wrong. That's crazy. I want to go with this guy who always has an answer. It's a specific answer, tells me exactly what to do, and he puts up all these pictures of his, unbeknownst to this person, hand-selected genetic outlier clients who get great results with it. 3D Muscle Journeys, putting up pictures of, like all kinds of stuff. Like, I don't know. There's no before and afters. Where's the 12-week transformations? So if you mean from a financial perspective and being perceived by a cult following as an expert, it absolutely you can do well. When the rubber hits the road, if you drop that person into a totally new society where there was no economic system and you just help people for free, they would be very poor at their job. When it really came down to it, you're only assessed on 2 years from now, how has this person's lifestyle changed, and have they changed their lives, met their goals, are they happier, healthier, better? They'd be failing left and right. But that's not the way it necessarily gets assessed. I think you will find, though, that there is typically a half-life that's much shorter for people like that, because the well eventually gets poisoned. They eventually get exposed, and it's just a question of how well can they put out those fires, and how egregious is the guruism. Is it something that is blatant snake oil selling, or is it something where they're just really that they believe in what they're saying? It's just that they are set up to not be aware of their own cognitive biases or improve their methods. I think even in people who are well-intentioned as well, you have to realize that your methods will get reinforced as you get more popular. So for example, you haven't hired us to work with us, but you're aware of all these ideas. You see them as positive. And if you hit a plateau in your diet, and I said, hey, let's try a diet break, you'd be like, yeah, that's a good idea. And you think of that interview, you think of the things you read, you think of what we talked about today, you'd have a positive expectancy effect. You probably wouldn't have hired us if you watched my videos, read about that stuff, went to the seminar, tried it, and then it was shit for you, right? You're like, oh, that doesn't work. I don't want to follow this guy anymore. You wouldn't hire me. So now I'm getting a selection bias of people who like my style or like our style, just generally get a good sense when they listen to me talk or read what I write, believe in the methods, and maybe have even had them be successful with them before. So you come to me, I do what I always do, you get good results, it reinforces those good results that I have. So I think to not get continually worse over time as you get more popular, it's really important to make sure that you stay abreast of the emerging research, you be aware of this, and you take a more and more and more client-led approach. And you make sure that the people who come to you are not putting you on this pedestal. So I was actually really pleased to hear, and it's an honor that you said it, that when you saw me and that I was starting my PhD, that it inspired you to do your bachelor's. That's a really good sign, because the whole guru model, the problem with it, in addition to everything I already said, is that you put yourself on an unassailable, unachievable pedestal. If you are God, I can't get to where you are. You are wholly separate from me, and it makes the person feel, in the end, that they will always need you as a crutch, that they can't actually improve themselves and find answers. While ideally, a coach or a teacher or a mentor is not someone who just convinces you that you're not as smart as them and that you can slowly learn some things and get them from me, but you'll never be as good as me. They're someone who gives you tools to get that on your own. This is a lifestyle change. This isn't me changing your life. This is you figuring out ways to learn from me as a teacher and incorporate it into what you do. And that goes from education, obviously a condescending approach and dunking on someone. Like you said, like if I've been like, idiot, ectomorph, bullshit, what is it, 1999? Like that would have just made you feel dumb. Like that doesn't accomplish anything except maybe it's some kind of sadistic way of me feeling good in the moment, like I'm the smartest guy in the room. So there's no benefit to that in terms of actually accomplishing anything. And that is not how you empower people or give them tools to change. Even if you do the quote-unquote right things from an evidence-based perspective, but you take an authoritarian approach to coaching, they're only going to have those benefits as long as you're telling them to do it, because they're not building any agency or autonomy or competence. And they may not even really be understanding why you're doing it. It might just, like, you could use sciencey language and tell someone who is in a top-down position with you as a coach that the keto diet saves and fixes all problems and solves everything. It would sound sciencey. They would have buy-in, and they would do it, and they would get results because it still works, And is that any better than you taking a more appropriate macronutrient breakdown or more appropriate deficit? No, because in the end, when you leave, they're going to go off it because they didn't actually learn why. They didn't have true buy-in. They only bought into you as their Lord and Savior and Guru from that top-down approach. So that's the whole underlying philosophy, and it goes really well with what we're talking about to bring it kind of back to these internal cues. Because a top-down coach is not going to be very good at asking you to pay attention to your signals, telling you that your ability to gauge things and look internally, either using auto-regulation or elements of intuitive eating, and that having this bottom-up approach rather than top-down, saying that your perceptions, your experiences, and your intuition are really useful for me because I can get all that information to better help you from you. While the coach would just say, the top-down hardcore guru would just be like, I don't care if you're hungry or if you're satiated or if you think you're under-recovered or if you couldn't lift the weight I programmed. The program's perfect. If you could only do 90% for one, it's just because you didn't follow the diet or you didn't sleep well. Something related to you not following my plan, it's your fault. You didn't manage your stress well enough. I'm not going to give you tools to manage your stress. I write your program. Go handle your shit, That's kind of the approach that I think is largely unhelpful, and I would probably even say beyond that counterproductive.
100%. Not to name any names, but yeah, there is someone I had in mind where I've actually seen them make someone cry in a PT session. And I was literally like, to have someone completely like humiliated and demoralized in a personal training session where they're paying money to a fitness professional, it was just completely inappropriate. And I've definitely never even found that beneficial, to be honest, because I've never found. I think any time where I tried to do that in the hopes of trying to being perceived as being like a harder edged coach who's in a position of power, it has never worked at all. And I've always gone from that kind of more patient, compassionate approach and try and listen to my clients and go beyond just, this is how you train, this is how you eat, I'll see you next week. So so very interesting that you said that, Eric. I did want to talk about this.
Can I say one thing, though? This is what Alberto Nunez calls grabbing the face mask. And it alludes to American football. You wear these helmets with the big face mask. And you might see the college football coach grab the face mask and yell something in their face. It doesn't necessarily have to be demeaning. It can be empowering. You can handle this. I know you got this. Or this is going to be brutal and hard, and you're going to get crushed in the process, but you're going to overcome this, and you're going to feel invincible once you survive this and climb on the other side. And it might come in response to a little bit of a self-pitying session. And you don't have to shit on them immediately. Like, you know what? Don't self-pity. Let's get in there and get after it. No, it can come from, I totally hear you. I understand what you're feeling. I know this experience. And let's say they're a contest prep competitor. In the end, every single person that gets on that stage is having these moments too. And in the end, whether you do well on that stage depends on the choices we make in response to these times. And then you give them the grab the face in that conversation. For some people, that's not a useful strategy. They would get there on their own. It just feels condescending. It feels like you're giving them unasked for help. Or it challenges them in a sense that they feel like they already have that. They can grab their own face mask. They just wanted to be able to vent to you. And now you kind of told them, look, you need to harden up. And it's like, look, man, I can be hard. I just wanted to actually have a mate who I could tell that I was suffering right now. I'm still going to get it done. I didn't need that, and now they won't come to you again. So I do think there's an element to reading people, and sometimes people, especially if they're new to the sport, if they don't know what's required in terms of how hard they have to work or what they have to overcome or what's normal. You're sometimes just normalizing for them. Yeah, this sucks, but this is actually a really normal part of bodybuilding, and we just got to get through it. So I think that done in the right way can be a useful tool at the right time with the right client. But it's something that it's water you want to tread into very cautiously, because it could be perceived as you think I'm weak, or you aren't listening to me, or you aren't validating my feelings. So I'm not going to say that there can't be those stern moments where you tell the person the truth, and it's not painting a rosy picture when there's actually something bad going on. It's compassionate but brutal honesty is kind of the way my coaching approach is. I think someone needs to hear exactly what the barrier to their own success is from my perspective, but it doesn't mean that I don't hear them or identify with them or give them the space to try to solve it on their own or give me feedback. So I think that's the kind of crux of what you're talking about. It's not just an attitude or a stance. It's also whether it's client led or whether it's top down, which is really the key distinction in my opinion.
Interesting. Yeah, I love that analogy as well. I want to talk about, just kind of leading off from that, about learning in general, especially in the bodybuilding sport and in general in life. And how much do you think humility has an importance in learning to be an effective learner?
Yeah, there's a good quote that ignorance is the path to knowledge. As much as you might experience like imposter syndrome and you don't want to look like the dumb person in the room or the person who everyone else is nodding and you're like, I didn't understand the basic assumption here to even know what you guys are all agreeing on. It's when you expose your ignorance and you have the strength and the willingness to be vulnerable and say, like, I don't know what's going on here. I don't know this, that you're able to learn. So people who need to win arguments or need to be the smartest person in the room, they're closing off an avenue to learning every time they do that, because when you dig your heels in and you can't lose if you were incorrect in the beginning of that debate or discussion, then that's not something you can get to. And then you can't learn that specific thing. And it may be that you're just trying to save face publicly and you'll try to go learn on your own, which is the best case scenario there, but it's still not a good scenario, because then you have to do that on your own instead of maybe right now you're having a conversation with someone who knows something you don't, who might be able to help you, who's figured this out. They've walked this pathway before, but you're just going to try to defend the position you were in, create some ad hominems, shift the goalposts, and then say you're too busy and leave, and then you go study it on your own. Like, yeah, that's better than just completely digging your heels and never changing your mind and always holding to that truth to save face. But you did just lose an opportunity to learn something, and you did just lose an opportunity to not just be a dick, and make the world slightly worse. So, I think humility is a key point to building bridges, learning, and making our community better. Humility allows you to expose your ignorance and then replace that ignorance with knowledge. But if you already know everything, then what's the point in learning? So I think at a very basic level, it's the starting point, to anything you want to learn. For sure.
Fantastic. I often use the Matrix analogy of the blue pill and the red pill. There's always this kind of comfortable deception in the blue pill that you can live this life of almost paradise and live in this blissful state of ignorance, or you can take this red pill, which unfortunately has this almost disgusting aftertaste to it, but has this phenomenal power that comes with it. Then if you can get over the hurdles, using the metaphor of the aftertaste of the ego, and not take it so personally, if you don't know something, that doesn't automatically mean you're stupid. It just means that we need to try and improve in this specific area. that if you can get through them hurdles of your ego being slightly crushed to small degrees, that you actually might learn something that's quite beneficial for the rest of your life. I can't count the number of times where I thought I've known something and then spoken to someone like yourself and it's completely flipped it on its head. And then I'm like, I need to go relearn this and this and this. Because I do want to be the best practitioner I can, and and I also want, especially for my YouTube channel, I wanted to kind of target people who I think are the most prolific, powerhouse leaders in their fields, and learn from them. And I always want to go to kind of what I call like the head of the family tree, rather than learning from people who seem to think they know it all. It never fails to amaze me the people who usually have the most amount of qualifications, have the most amount of experience, and the most amount of successes within their own life and with other people. Usually the people who say I don't know everything. The amount of times I've listened to a Lane Norton interview and he says, when I did my PhD, it surprised me how much I don't actually know. And you would never think of someone that, he's coached so many people and has been such an icon in the bodybuilding industry, that he still to this day says, I don't know everything. I don't try and make out that I know everything. So very interesting, Eric. So talking about learning,
you're 100% right. Like, someone would not be pursuing knowledge continually if they thought they knew everything, right?
100%.
I mean, so if you see knowledge as an endpoint, that means you have learned everything at some point, or you don't care to learn more. Which, fair enough. I don't think that's the way I want to live my life, but you're allowed to. But yeah, I think the stance of there is more to learn is a stance of humility, and that's what produces someone who's willing to go through getting a doctorate, or go through, it doesn't have to be formal, informal continuing life education. Mm-hmm. But no, it's an honor to be on the YouTube channel. I do appreciate it. I'm getting up on my my time limit before I got to start my day, but I really do appreciate having me on the channel, man.
You're absolutely welcome, mate. Absolutely welcome. Just one little funny thing, just before we go, I know you're probably in a bit of a rush. Funny story. When I had actually come down to that event we had in London, I spoke to you and I was so excited to speak to you. And after it, I was like, I wanted to ask Eric so many more questions, but the queue had already formed. Like, it was like Noah's Ark. Like, there were so many people, and I was just like, oh God, I'm going to be here all day. And I waited as long as I could. And I saw your wife and I thought, you know what, I'll just talk to her, just say, hello, really enjoyed the session, I thought your husband's done a fantastic job. And it came off so bad, and I said to her, just to make conversation, how long have you guys been seeing each other? And she went, we're married. And literally, I was like, oh God, I've said the wrong thing, and then was like, oh, okay, and then just kind of left it. And I thought she thought I was being funny or weird, so, but I thought it was funny after it. But yeah, I appreciate it. So, but yeah, no, thank you very much for your time, Eric. And is there maybe like a website or anything?
I doubt you, just to make you feel better. I think when you, at least to Americans, not especially because we hadn't been outside of America much, when you say seeing each other, to us, it makes us think like dating.
Yeah.
So saying we're married is just like, oh, well, we're a little more than seeing each other, So,
yeah, I realised just as I said it how it had come across, and I was like, oh God. But yeah, I thought it was funny. But in terms of getting a hold of you, Eric, is there any email or a website we can maybe promote for you now as well, to, because you guys are literally the cutting edge and so helpful, any ways that we can get a hold of you for other people as well?
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, I think best place to track down what I do and get more information on anything we talked about is 3dmusclejourney.com. That's the number 3, letter D, the words musclejourney.com. From there, you can find links to my books, the research review I do with the Stronger by Science guys, Trexler and Knuckles, as well as Dr. Zerdos, 3DMJ Vault, our blog posts, our articles, our podcast is all there. And then I do Iron Culture, which is kind of a discussion of the history, science, and culture of lifting with Omar Isuf. That's a podcast you can find on all platforms. And then finally, if you want to get more daily content, you can follow me on Instagram at Helms3DMJ.
Thank you so much, Eric. I really, really enjoyed that, and I hope in the future we do more of these. Really, really good experience. So have a great day, my man, and I'll speak to you soon. Thank you so much.
Got it, brother. You too.